so many people kid themselves that ideas are a good thing. Ideas are a disaster. Ideas themselves are a disastrous way to start any entrepreneurial journey. But it's hard to do anything else because it's not intellectually hard. Anyone can understand how to define a hypothesis, but it's awkward. We're straight back to therapy. It's bad on the ego. It hurts the ego to be told that you're the thing that you love. To actually acknowledge that a thing that you think is brilliant, is a brilliant idea, actually at the heart of it, there's some fundamental flaw in it. Most people don't want to know that.
Welcome to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast. Too many advanced science and engineering companies fail to deliver their innovations from the lab to the market. We are on a mission to change that. My name is Chris Reichhelm, and I'm the founder and CEO of Deep Tech Leaders. Each week, we speak with some of the world's leading entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, and policymakers about what it takes to succeed on the lab to market journey. Join us. Lab to Market Leadership listeners, we are taking Lab to Market Leadership on the road. We're traveling through Europe, we're hitting the US, and then we're coming back to the UK, all the while continuing our discussions with entrepreneurs, with corporate executives, with investors, with academics, and policymakers, trying to understand what it takes to deliver innovation and companies from the lab to the market. Today's episode is going to be nothing if not thought-provoking. We're talking with a gentleman named Mark Bjornsgaard, who is the founder and CEO of a venture builder called System 2 Group. And System 2 are involved in applying lean management principles and practices to the development of all kinds of businesses, including those in the deep tech universe. Mark has had 8 exits, all successful, including one of his most recent deep green technologies, which was sold to Octopus Energy for more than 200 million pounds. Whether you can apply fully lean management thinking and practices to the lab to market universe, I'm not sure. I'm skeptical, but Mark is very convincing. Let's see how he does. Let's get into it. Mark Bjornsgaard, thank you so much for joining me.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are a big proponent and believer in lean principles and lean thinking for the development of businesses. And you're not alone. I think the global software industry, the global SaaS industry, has certainly grown up practicing a lot of those disciplines. Eric Ries is held in the highest esteem as a management thinker. And if we compare the kind of 1960s, 70s, 80s view of strategy development and operation in the world that we live in now, or maybe now that we're more finely tuned to what reality is, perhaps this very lean way of thinking and acting when it comes to developing a business is the way to go. My question is, and I want to frame this just at the outset of our discussion today, but my question is, how much of this can we apply to the advanced science and engineering industry, particularly to deep tech? And I ask that because for most deep tech businesses, they are developing advanced science and engineering platforms. There's a high degree of technology risk. Generally, these are platforms that have been in gestation for years. They tend to be IP rich. And they are often, particularly when they're spun out of labs or universities, they're often developed with a problem vaguely in mind, but not so clearly in mind. And I think this applies in particular to life sciences. So if we're trying to create a new molecule or protein to combat disease, so we have a very clear understanding of what we're trying to do there, potentially in medical devices as well, potentially. In the other deep tech industries, non-life sciences, non-medical, there perhaps that problem isn't framed as clearly. But nevertheless, because of the length of the technology development cycle, and because of the lab to market journey itself, it makes me wonder whether management teams building those businesses can be as nimble and as experimented, that's a word, experimenting, as lean teaches us to be. So with all of that, and we're going to have a conversation about this for the next hour, but that's what, I really question just how much we can go to that place, but I know you're going to tell me, and I know you're going to have lots of examples. So before we do that, please, let's back up. Tell us a little bit about your background, because you've got a really most unusual background, especially within these industries.
Unusual is often a polite way of saying yes, saying something not so polite. So thank you for having me, first of all. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to getting into the conversation. As you say, businesses that are shuffling molecules or have high degrees of technology risk in them are themselves fascinating in a way that kind of other businesses, when you've got innovation in the business model or you've got innovation in some other aspect of the model, they're different. My background, well, I'd studied history and politics, so that's a troublemaker's degree apparently. And I think I'm not sure I certainly haven't taken any sort of structured, clever path towards what I've done. I guess I've always just looked for the adventure in life. I didn't really have that luxury, I must say, but I just couldn't bear the thought of doing something conventional. So my first job was working at a record label. I'd worked at record labels all while I was at college and just sort of stuffed jiffies full of CDs at the time. And then after that, we set up our first startup, and it was really that journey that we went on, which was just go and find stuff that's interesting, that kind of gnarly problems to crack. I love gray areas. I think a lot of people who are doing this love resolving. I think there's a bit of autism in there somewhere, which is you can't bear to have the thing unresolved. So I think there's some of that. But I think, like many people doing this, we all come from wildly different backgrounds, and we learn our craft and we learn our trade in different ways. I think one of the most important things, that I ever did was have therapy and continue to have therapy. I think some degree of self-awareness is incredibly important. I needed it, by the way. I needed it, but that's another story. But I think, I think people find themselves into this world in different strands. But if you've had a decent amount of success, the principle, that sort of self-awareness, that trying to model reality, trying to see what's really real and what you're being either presented with or what you might be kidding yourself about, that is really the unlock at a kind of meta level. And I guess that's also what lean in its own way does. Were there certain types of, so I've got a couple of questions in that. You raised some really interesting points. Were there certain types of problems that you were drawn to? Only ones that you've got to have commitment and passion for what you're doing. The number of people who are trying to build a startup, and I can't get past that. I've always only been able to do something that my brain has got kind of hooked into, whether that's digital distribution of music or a decentralized care business, whatever it is. I've had to have something. Commitment is transformative, and so I think that is. I've sort of busied myself and got involved in a whole bunch of different businesses across different sectors, and I think the only real thread between them is those things that I've just got interested in personally. Yeah. Was it an idea, or was it people, or was it something else that acted as a catalyst? There was Michael Lewis on his podcast recently. He said, I can't remember exactly what his phrase was, but he just basically loves going up against something that's big and gnarly and that's difficult. And I think I've always been quite attracted to that. I've never really sort of been that enthused about what I think of as stripy socks businesses, which is sort of traditional entrepreneurial endeavors, which are absolutely no question with them. But I've always tried to find big trouble because that's sort of where the big adventure is, I guess. But it doesn't always end well.
No, no, it doesn't. You mentioned, and thank you for sharing this. You mentioned the therapy piece too, and the importance of emotional awareness. Can you talk a little bit about how that's helped you? I'm guessing that's helped you. You mentioned it. It's been very productive for you, but how so?
I think you in some way, oddly, when you participate in therapy, you become a much better listener because you're ultimately listening to yourself as well as the advice from a therapist. So I think to some degree it's the understanding comes through the acknowledgement, the awareness of what is in your life. And I think so I think it's not so much sort of the big insights. It's not so much removing the blockers in life because there always are, but it's really more about, I think I'm still not very good at it, but you become better at listening and creating some sort of some gaps, some sort of mind space in and around whatever you're looking at, which itself is useful because so often we just pursue or we continue because that's the trajectory. So it's very difficult to ask ourselves whether something's the right thing to do all the time.
Yeah. But as an entrepreneur, it's in many ways, it's critical. You've got to be asking yourself those questions, I think, on a regular basis. And you've got to, and the most important thing of all is you've got to be able to kill your ideas. Yeah. That is the single biggest. That I think is. I've been asked this question a bit, and I think I've sort of landed on that as perhaps the only thing I really can do very well is that I can be oddly sociopathic about killing an idea which doesn't work, and I don't know whether that's just the character. Maybe I score high on the sociopath test, but I think that's also an ability. I think just acknowledging when something's wrong and being able to act on it when you have the number of times, particularly in recent history, where I don't know, you're very often wrong. You're very often not wrong when you. There's a saying that the first time you think about firing somebody, you should fire them. It's kind of the same thing with a business. The first time you think about killing it, kill it, because that whatever has made it through from your subconscious is usually telling you something you need to hear. How old were you when you took on your first entrepreneurial journey? How old were you when you took on your first entrepreneurial role or experience?
Artist First was our first business. So 27 years ago, nearly. We that was, we made all the same mistakes that everyone makes in a business. We built technology. We believed, we didn't test our assumptions. We raised a ton of money. And maybe you have to go through that. Maybe that rite of passage is something that you have to go through. Maybe it is. But I guess since then, and reflecting on the good and the bad of that business, that I guess is where I sort of, I differed then. That's where I parted ways with a more conventional approach. It was always incredibly frustrating to me that we were doing things that we thought were right, but we didn't have any data to suggest they were. So that was the kernel of it.
Did that lead to you? Did that lead you to start exploring lean principles? Were people talking in those days of this type of different approach?
I think we knew we were writing software, so we kind of understood the principles of sort of good software development, which lean kind of leans on, if you like. So I guess for me, lean always had the problem and the challenge that it started with build. It started with building something, and hadn't necessarily declared what you're trying to learn. So that was, and I always went back to my kind of, GCSE early kind of, school science teacher who was, well, you define a hypothesis, you have an aim, you're trying to figure out what you're trying to learn, and then you build an experiment to do that. So for me, that's where I think I started to diverge in my thinking for the whole lean startup thing. It seemed to me, it seemed too focused on it needed to go one step back, if you like. It needs to abstract itself one step further. But the challenge with doing that is that it becomes, on the surface, life becomes very dull. Because if you can talk about building an MVP, then it's super exciting, it's fun, but no one really wants to be told they have to define a hypothesis, which is what I've written a book about. There's no book in the Amazon bookstore with hypothesis in the title because it's unfathomably dull. No one wants to go back to their school chemistry because, not many people do anyway. But when a long time ago, we figured out that actually if we got more and more disciplined about what we were trying to test, we then realized that actually that was completely woolly and that everyone is woolly about that. So when we talk about ideas, we're actually talking about these random bundles of assumption. And actually the discipline, the approach is taking everything that you've got rattling around in your head, getting it out on a whiteboard and breaking it down systematically. And it doesn't have to take very long, but it is so that was our unlock.
Okay. Does current lean thinking assume that this process you're referring to right now is baked into build?
Lean assumes that it doesn't really matter where you start, just build something and then you'll get into the build, measure, learn loop.
Yeah.
And that is legitimate. That's legitimate. The trouble is, if you start to build something, you don't necessarily know what you're seeing, what you're trying to learn. You don't necessarily have a baseline. Say, okay, I was trying to learn that, and therefore this is the next one. So it is in itself, in my view, inherently wasteful because you don't start from a position of what someone's trying to learn. But the real problem is that you don't actually ask yourself a really awkward question right at the beginning of the process, which is, am I really clear about the product I'm trying to sell and the customer I'm trying to acquire? So many people kid themselves that ideas are a good thing. Ideas are a disaster. Ideas themselves are a disastrous way to start any entrepreneurial journey. But it's hard to do anything else because it's not intellectually hard. Anyone can understand how to define a hypothesis, but it's awkward. We're straight back to therapy. It's bad on the ego. It hurts the ego to be told that you're the thing that you love. To actually acknowledge that a thing that you think is brilliant, is a brilliant idea, actually at the heart of it, there's some fundamental flaw in it. Most people don't want to know that.
And so, I think you're right. I think it's especially true for experienced researchers. And if we think about the deep tech industry, if we think about lab to market journeys, it's generally starting with an academic or a researcher or perhaps an experienced engineer. It's going to be someone in research or an experienced technologist of some kind. And the journey generally starts with, I know something, I have an appreciation for a particular area. I've been observing and operating within this area for some time. Here's my observation. This doesn't work. It needs to be solved. It represents a good problem. And I'm going to go and try and solve it now. And I think to your point, they'll ruminate on that idea. They develop that idea over time, and it becomes a center point of their research, perhaps for their PhD, perhaps for another piece of research. Sometimes it's given to them through a grant. And they say, okay,
sure,
I need to work on this as part of a grant exercise. So I'm going to go and I'm going to build my knowledge and skills around this particular problem. But to your point, there's not an awful lot of validation past that point. So they may develop insights. Now, they may be very experienced. Most generally are not, though. They don't have that much experience in the space. So they're less inclined to go out and start validating. Is this a problem worth solving? And how might we approach that problem? Instead, it's let's start developing something. Let's start developing an innovation and see how that goes.
Yeah. That starting with technology is counterintuitive, but whenever you're trying to test a hypothesis, pretty much the last thing you want to do is start with technology. So if you're a deep tech startup and you're by definition anchored in the technology, then it's very plausible that you would start with some sort of solution. You'd start to build your business. You would think, well, I need the technology, but of course that's the last thing you need. The absolute last thing you want to be doing is building any technology. Hardware is hard, and every single assumption. If you can be disciplined about what you think is the behavioural driver behind the product or service which you're trying to offer, if you can be disciplined about that and really understand your user, then 99.9% of the time you don't need to build technology. You don't need it. What you need to do is find some other faster, quicker, cheaper way of testing the assumption. And that's generally not building any tech.
But at some point, so to validate the thinking, to validate the hypothesis, yes, you may be right on there. And I've read your presentation, and so I know some of the thinking that goes around this. You can work with partners to kind of help validate some of that thinking as well. But at some point, if you are developing a company that intends to be or play some kind of role in a value chain, which is what most deep tech companies are trying to do. They want to become a part of a value chain. They want to contribute to that. They want to become proper small companies. They want to be able to build product, scale that product, and be a supply chain member in a particular domain. At some point, that is going to require, especially if it's deep tech, technology. But so then is the point... Well, because then what's the value? Well, then what's the value they're getting out? What value do they capture in that exercise? And how do they capture value in that exercise?
The trouble is, when we start to build a business, we think we're building a business, but we're not. We're testing an assumption. So if you start a business thinking that you're building a business, that's inherently wrong. So everyone starts with that assumption, exactly as you've described it, but that's wrong. Because if I think I can create a new molecule to cure cancer, and I think it's going to take me 5 years, and I'm trying to test the assumption that someone will buy that molecule off me, why don't I just create a piece of paper that says I've done that? I've created that molecule, and then test whether somebody wants to buy that molecule off me. As Reese says all the time, there are only two scenarios in that. One, no one will want it, in which case you haven't wasted any time building a molecule nobody wanted. Two, everyone bites your arm off for that molecule, and they go, oh my God, Chris, I love this molecule. Please give me this molecule. And you think, brilliant, I'm going to go and make that molecule now. But the point is, you have to test the desirability assumption before you test the feasibility and the viability. There's no logic to doing anything else. Otherwise you're just having a punt.
Yes. So I think that is all. So I think that's true. I think that within the life sciences, let's stay in the life sciences for a moment, which has some distinctions from kind of typical deep tech. If you develop a novel molecule that is great for treating certain types of lung cancer, there is, generally it's felt that there's going to be a market for that. Now it may be just what kind of market there's going to be for that ultimately is going to depend. And my understanding, again, I don't work in these industries, but we support and advise these industries, is that obviously, the ultimate customers are not going to get too excited about anything until they've seen, to your point, more data. So there are lots of people out there saying, hey, I might have this and I might have that and so on. And if this was all easy to build, it would have been built. So there are lots of caveats going into their communication. well, if you were able to create something novel like this and it had efficacy within this range and so on, then yeah, we'd probably bite your arm off. But good luck developing it. And so much of that challenge goes in the development of that. So
100%. But that's why deep tech is not deep tech business. That's why you've got it. There's always going to be that balance. But just asking yourself who those people are who might want your molecule and why they might want it serves you very well before you start building the molecule. Yeah. Now, of course, there's always a balance between, particularly in life sciences, there's always a balance between the R&D process and the business process. And there's always a yin and a yang and a trade-off with it. But the trouble is a lot of people will do 5 years on something before they ask themselves, well, hang on, what's actually the behavioral driver? What's really the human hook in someone's mind that's going to make them want to buy this molecule? Yeah. So it's not to say it's all smoke and mirrors, but there's just always going to be a balance between that. And that validation. The problem is that most people actually don't want that validation. They are convinced that molecule is amazing and it's become a horcrux embedded in their soul. And the last thing they want is somebody going, but who's going to buy that molecule and for how much and where? Yeah.
But let me play devil's advocate. Let's take mRNA, which was our way of combating COVID-19. And Katalin Karikó and her colleague in the US, she started working on mRNA therapies, I think 30 years ago. And for the longest time, she was not considered a serious researcher by prestigious academic institutions. She was not given any kind of grant funding. The industry, we can call it the industry, regularly looked down on the research she was doing. She believed she was onto something. And later on, her colleague in the US, and forgive me, I don't remember his name, but eventually they kind of carried on their research. He was operating in a field that was considered kind of acceptable. She partnered with him, and together they kind of continued. And this continued up until we were in the throes of COVID-19, when all of a sudden the rest of the world got what she was on about. And they said, shit, you were right. And now we desperately need this. Sorry. And here we go. So I think if I think about the mindset of a scientist, in as far as I can know one, I think it's with that in mind, that the rest of the market may not always know what we know. So
no. But that example, the market changed, and therefore that product became of age, right? Yeah. I talk a lot about this. I love this idea of the Stockdale paradox, right? Where you have to be monk and hitman. You have to love your idea, but also be prepared to kill it. And I think, I mean, I'm being pejorative and binary to kind of try and prove a point, but the reality is, it is a balance. There is a balance there. I think too many people on the technical deep tech side don't have enough of the commercial. We know this, but it's not just they don't have enough of the commercial, but the commercial isn't really commercial. It's really being honest enough about the mindset of themselves and their buyers. Yeah. Digging into that, constantly doing the molecule shifting, but also then digging into where you think this thing might fit. And with who, ultimately, all products and services have to be bought by a human. And us humans, we ain't so rational, right? There's the reason why we call us the venture capital company System 2, because Kahneman and Tversky, fathers of behavioral economics, they coined this phrase System 1, System 2, right? You have to engage your System 2. And by the way, all they ever did was just sit in a room laughing. Apparently, all the stories about them was that all you could hear was just laughing. That the Kahneman and Tversky were and all they did was just set themselves hypotheses and riddle. And that was their way of working, which is why we called our business this, because actually we didn't even invent this process. It was actually invented by a much greater mind than ourselves, which was just fall in love with trying to find what the behavioral hook is. before you go for a solution.
I get it.
And
I get it.
Always a balance. Yeah.
Can you talk, Mark, a little bit about how you've seen this work well in businesses with which you've been involved?
Everyone, I can't get arrested teaching this process. Entrepreneurs hate it. Most entrepreneurs absolutely hate it. The visceral reaction. Most people in corporate, there are about 5% of people who can take the poison and then come out the other side. It's a bit like whatever happened in June 2 when they drink the water and they nearly die. Most people hate it because their ego just immediately fires and you're just calling them an asshole, an idiot who's got a shit idea. I mean, by the way, it is a shit idea. They're not necessarily calling them an asshole, but their egos can't differentiate between these two. You say your idea is shit and you actually calling somebody shit. So unless you're very tentative in a way that you approach this, most people just cannot deal with this because they say, I've got this great idea. And you go, oh, brilliant. Can you just tell me the hypothesis? What's driving it? And it's like, fuck off. No, I don't want to do that. So the only people who've ever made this work are people who've seen it work. So we have, and we've made it work in different corporate settings, in GSK, in Barclays, in British Gas, because actually a very small group of people could see it working. But the medicine is brutal. I mean, it's incredibly intellectually satisfying and fun, and there's a lot of laughter, but it doesn't look anything like a normal innovation process. So most people, because we're humans and we assume what we see as the norm is right, we reject it. So it's very hard to do, weirdly. Yeah.
Did you apply it to deep green technology or deep green energy?
Yeah. Every business that we've done, has come from an 8-week sprint of beating the shit out of hypotheses. So
is that right? Wow.
Yeah, everyone. We've done 8,500 tests, we think, across our businesses. So we've had 8 exits. We've probably done 1,000 tests for every exit we've had. And that's a test. That's a hypothesis which starts with a behavioural driver, not a solution. So what we think of as a because Chris, because I want that, because I'm bugged by this, Chris will value this. So all of our businesses started like that. I mean, some have come easier than others. You know, some Deep Green is a 10-year overnight success, whereas others have very sort of quickly emerged. But it's not so much the ones that it's not so much about the ones that have been successful. It's much more about the kill rate. So we are really good at killing stuff. So if the data from a hypothesis and an experiment doesn't look good, so many people will just go, oh no, it's fine, it'll be fine, just keep going. It's like, no, not. Like noise attenuation for kids' headphones is a shit idea. It's a shit idea because parents don't want their kids to trash their hearing. It's a shit idea because if you tell a kid to turn their music down and their mobile phone only plays their music 70% loud, they're going to buy another mobile phone. Yeah. So you don't have to be, you can be right, but the market can stay irrational, right?
Yes.
And that's 90% of this is a fucking great molecule. Everyone should buy this. And it's like, you're right, but they don't want it. 70% of people would rather die than exercise. Look, we've got it in our world, right? 30% of people are morbidly obese, 30% of people are obese, only 20% of people are healthy. So at least 70% of the population would literally rather die than be healthy. So if that's the case, we can kid ourselves about anything.
That's interesting. So what you're basically saying is, and this is what, if I think about the boards of companies or the leadership teams of companies when they're in the early days of trying to figure out what markets they're going to serve and how they're going to serve those markets and the nature of their offering, they're very, in my observation, they're very rarely thinking about the behavioral drivers that are going to lead to adoption. And they're starting with, this should slot like that because they do this. And it's generally based on strategy. So Here's their strategy. They're going in this direction. They're deploying these technologies. This is what they're trying to do with that. We could fit like that. Look, those pieces look nice together on this slide deck. And we can see that working. But I would say that for most, that's probably the extent. There might be some kind of digging around in terms of who should we be talking to in the organization? Who are the ultimate sign-off leaders of this? Who do we have to influence? What other partners are going to be around the table that we need to kind of consider and get on side? So it's almost what you're advocating is an extension of those questions. You need to keep going. You need to keep, and you may need to get away from that group, but you need to keep asking the questions, what's going to change the behavior? Because ultimately it's going to result in some kind of change of behavior to adopt your solution and not to continue doing what they're doing. And changing behavior, even I know changing behavior is really difficult.
Yeah, that's what everyone is trying to do when they're trying to launch a new products and services. They're trying to change a behavior. And everything you just listed there is what's wrong about corporate innovation. Everything is wrong with it. It's all upside down. Research is a disaster. Senior people thinking their existing products and services give them a right to play. The idea of ideas, the way they're funded, the fact that they're done all bad, everything about a corporate innovation process is mostly going to, everyone should be involved. It should be a happy, fun process. It should be really quick and there's a winner. I mean, all of these facets that we think that make up good corporate innovation is why 1 in 11 businesses succeed. Because it ultimately no one, as you say, has asked themselves the single question, which is what behavior am I trying to change? And have I got a product that will change that behavior?
Wow. That's, now I know you do work with corporates, and I've seen from your presentation and from the stuff that I've researched that a lot of that seems to be very effective. Because most deep tech companies are startups at various stages, generally the early stage. How much of this do you think can apply at the very early stage of a company's development?
If you take the 30-year development of a molecule, why can't you start asking yourself the question right at day one? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do 10 years of molecule shuffling before you've even got something from which you could then ethically test an assumption. But if you're in the business of business, then that's the only question you're ever going to have to answer. If you're in the business of, it's a bit like an artist. If you're in the business of making great art and you don't care that anyone will listen to your music, knock yourself out. Record a chainsaw for 10 minutes and call it art. But if you want to sell any music, then accept the reality of who you're trying to communicate to. So I think everyone can apply the principles all the time. And of course, the more you do that and the more you get this balance right, the more likely you are for this bit, the sort of sales bit, if you like, to start to impact the R&D bit of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, I thought, I'm just going to make this molecule. As you start to unpack an idea and as you start to understand who's buying for what reasons, then that starts to obviously impact the early R&D you're doing. So in the case of Deep Green, we were building right 10 years ago. Our prototypes were all with crypto miners. We thought, well, of course, if crypto is going to be the next foundational kind of financial system, then everyone's going to be delighted by having a crypto miner in their hot water tank. Turns out, very bad assumption. So, you can always ask yourself the most awkward question, which is, am I doing? And because most businesses fail, whenever an entrepreneur or any corporate exec or any R&D deep tech company says, I've got this product, statistically, you can say that they're going to fail because its statistics says that they are very unlikely to be talking to the 1 in a million who's just nailed it the first time.
Yeah.
It's by definition wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think almost every single, we've had a lot of conversations with investors and boards over the years, and they all say something very similar. And actually, I will say that most academics say the same thing, that when it comes to commercialization, when it comes to the type of thinking that's required around which a company can be developed, that is called commercial thinking. It's not, too often we make the immediate association of sales. Well, we got to sell it. So let's make something and then we'll sell it. And hopefully we'll get some revenue from what we've made. And, and isn't that what the commercialization process is all about? And actually what you're expanding on beautifully is this notion of why. Why is anyone going to change their behavior? Will they be willing to change their behavior in order to accommodate what we have? Or perhaps a better way of framing that is, what can we develop around which they will be prepared to change behavior?
And then test that assumption.
Absolutely.
Never focus on that and then test that assumption rather than believe you're building a product.
Yeah.
Because if you start the entrepreneurship journey thinking you're an entrepreneur, you're already wrong. You are only a tester of assumption.
That's
and
so
to be honest,
interesting.
you're only ever a tester of assumption. Yeah, but that's where everyone gets. That's why it's so hard, because it's just, people think they're a race car driver when they're actually a chef. They're doing something. They're trying to do something that is completely different from what needs to be done.
Can you talk a little bit about that validation process? So let's say I decide with a small group of experimenters, all right, we're not entrepreneurs. We're not going to fall under that brand. You make valid points here. We have certain types of capability in a particular field. Let's get out of life sciences. Let's say it's chemistry or batteries, or let's say it's AI, okay? And so we have certain capabilities as a group of engineers, and we're interested in, we could be interested in setting up a business, but we're not sure yet.
Yeah.
So we see ourselves as this group of experimenters. What do we do to kind of hypothesize and validate? How do we know when we're getting somewhere? How do we know when we can start kind of to involve other parties and get capital and all of that kind of stuff? How do we know when we're making progress?
Well, again, the really annoyingly counterintuitive thing about this all is that you must also start doing immediately. So you can't spend 10 weeks scribbling on a whiteboard hypothesizing. You force yourself into the discipline of daily and weekly experimentation. So once you've got a hypothesis, then you test it. Get another hypothesis, test it. So
where does the hypothesis come from?
It comes. It literally comes from talking to each other. So you've got a hypothesis for a business. We do these workshops. We call them rinsing workshops, and whoever volunteers to do them is incredibly brave. But they sit on a stool and they start talking about their business, and we start to immediately say, "Well, no, that's the solution. Oh, it's going to be brilliant because it's this. No, stop. Who's it for? For a lady, I think. Brilliant, because it's, no, stop the solution. You know who it's for. Now, why do they want it?" And very quickly, either people stop talking, storm out the room, or you write something on a whiteboard, which is, because I'm a lady, because I don't want to be patronized in a car dealership, a lady will value something. So you have to just force yourself to never let yourself off foot, never even start. Just always start behavior first. And it's crushingly awful, horrible to do. So for 3 weeks, most teams just sit in awful existential pain, somewhere between sort of misery and rage. and then a few people go, "Oh, I get it. It's like, because the cup can't spill coffee, Chris will value a thermos with a top on it to go to work." And then you see the penny drop, and then you're off. That's all it is. It's just an intellectual It's just, but you've got to be okay with you've got to die before you die. We're back to therapy. It's just Buddha. It's just, don't have any emotional attachment to it. Just accept the fact that you're almost certainly wrong. And then the joy in finding something that might be useful is immense. Of course, way more joy than you can find in just pursuing a shit idea. So I give you a really good example. Which eventually became eBay's a campaign for eBay. It wasn't meant to be a campaign; it was meant to be a product. But the hypothesis was, because I find it difficult to find the specific dress I want in a secondhand marketplace where there might be 10,000 dresses on eBay, red dresses in this case, Miranda will value a service which curates her just the 4 which are most suitable for her. If that's your hypothesis, your driver is based, a secondhand marketplace is just a wash with stuff, and I need somebody to curate it. What you don't then do is build an AI. What you do is you ring up your mate who pretends to be the AI, and whoever sends you a tweet saying, I want a red dress, you very, very quickly as you can, do it with a human, send the link back, and then you test how many times they open that link and click on it. And it turns out an unfathomable amount of times of click through. But the point is hypothesis experiment. This is the counterintuitively working in this way. You're not allowed to, like Kahneman and Tversky did, you're not allowed to sit there for weeks on end laughing and scribbling on a whiteboard. You must get into a cadence of scribbling on a Monday, thinking on a Tuesday, getting it live on a Thursday, and on. And so you're forcing yourself into this discipline of experimentation rather than product development.
I get it. Do you have an example, Mark, in the enterprise space with perhaps more complex solutions, not consumers, where you can kind of do that? Because I'm a procurement director at, I don't know, a big utility. And I want to buy a certain types of solution. Let's say I'm a procurement director at a gas distribution network. This is topical right now. And I need to buy systems that are going to help my gas distribution network manage itself better, that are going to allow us to keep our costs contained, that are going to ensure that there are no blowouts along the network because those are costly and potentially very dangerous, that are going to fulfill a certain amount of regulations and so on. Are there examples like that where people can also do that kind of quick experimentation of their hypothesis and get the kind of data back that they're going to need?
Well, firstly, what's really interesting, in even what you said there, in those 4 or 5 short sentences, there are probably 50 ideas and there are probably 5,000 hypotheses in what you've just said, which is the problem. Because is it the fact that I'm trying to detect this gas on a gas line? Or is it that I'm trying to save costs? Or is it that I'm trying to... So we can't even begin. Let's first of all smash that apart. What is it? Because each of those ideas have got 20 behavioral drivers, they've got 20 users, and they've got 20 potential solutions. And each of those is an infinite monkey cube of variables that we need to wrestle with before we even then go and test one of those things. And therein lies the problem, because it's like, stop fucking about, Mark, just get on with it. I want the answer. Of course you do. But that's why you're going to make a mess of it. Because we really need to do some proper thinking. No research, no sitting about with startups in nice glass-fronted offices, no crapping on about things that innovation exercises. Proper system 2 thinking in front of a whiteboard, just really quickly. What's the behavioral driver? What is it? What's more important than detecting the leak or the costing? Where is it? So I'll give you a really good example in the B2B. I mean, Deep Green is a really good example, right? Yeah. I mean, for 10 years we didn't build any data center. We just built really shonky prototypes until we knew there was market fit. So even the final prototypes. Our car subscription service, we put that car subscription service up we got inundated with requests for EVs. This was about 7 years ago. So within 24 hours, we had to buy 7 Renault Zoes, which arrived on my driveway. But we didn't buy the Renault Zoe. I've got a picture of my wife standing there like that with a transporter outside our house going, where the fuck are these cars going to go? But it's like, imagine if we bought those 7 cars and then put the experiment up and thought, oh shit, no one needs those cars. The most challenging B2B one, I know the fact that a defense contractor is doing stands at B2B market stands with products that don't exist. So you're taking stands at B2B conferences with products that don't exist, but you're testing the market.
That's interesting.
Right?
That's
Why would you do it?
really interesting.
You're a defense contractor and you've got I don't know, whatever, a silent propulsion mechanism, and you think it's equal to surfboards. Why would you put a day? Why would you put a day of effort into doing that? Just fucking brand.
I have a couple of questions. I have a couple of questions based on this. This is really, really interesting. I mean, the first one is funding. So me and my little band of experimenters want to start experimenting. But we don't have much money. We're a young group. But we can't say, we're going to struggle to build a slide deck.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly where we're going yet because we haven't been through this exercise. So do you have a view on capitalizing exercises like this? If your intention is to ultimately build a company, we're going to be a band of experimenters. We're going to hopefully find what we're going to do, and then we're going to go forward. Or is the deal that we're supposed to somehow float ourselves? We have to kind of self-fund ourselves until we get to that.
I think there are 2 answers to the question. First of all, there aren't enough venture capital businesses who are impressed by the results of an experiment relative to the creds of the founders. So that's on us, right? Like you should as a small crack team of experimenters with very little money, you should get massive brownie points. Who needs a 20-page slide deck? I just want to see the what was the result of that experiment? What was the hypothesis you were testing, and what was the experiment? You should get so capital is wrong in that respect. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have corporate innovation. He thinks it's all going to be fine in 18 months. Guess what? It's not. It's going to take 7 years. So if your average tenure of a CMO or a CEO is only 2.5 years, be prepared to be planting trees under which you will never feel the shade. Whatever the expression is. This is a 7-year journey. Be honest with yourself about it. It's going to take 5 times as long. It's going to take 5 times as much money. And so from a corporate point of view, just be realistic about how much and how long. And then when you haven't got much money, go to the venture capital and go to money who are impressed by your data, not your slide deck.
That's a seriously interesting point. And I wonder about the kind of people who are going to be more likely to succeed in that type of exercise. So at the top of this discussion, we talked about your background. You've got an unusual background. I don't mean that pejoratively. You've got a great unusual background. I've got an unusual background. And I think some of the most interesting people have unusual backgrounds. But, and if I think about some of the most successful entrepreneurs in deep tech, they've got unusual backgrounds too. Elon Musk, despite what he'd have you believe, he's got an undergrad degree in economics and he's got an undergrad degree in engineering. He's not a rocket scientist. He's not.
No.
He's a super learner. He's extraordinary at building companies. He's extraordinary at moving things very, very quickly to get done. He built Colossus, XAI supercomputer, in 19 days. That generally takes 3 to 4 years to build a supercomputer. He did it in 19 days. So, he's got the ability to adapt. Some of the principles that we're discussing, maybe perhaps they've emerged from him and his way of doing things and the way he thinks. and I've known other deep tech entrepreneurs who've got backgrounds in finance and who've got backgrounds in history as well. They're not scientists, they're not engineers. The benefit they have is that when it comes to ideas, they're not wedded to them. So they're not like scientists who spent a lifetime so far, 15, 20 years developing a particular topic, and you can see they have got so much riding on it. And so for them not to be right is going to almost be heartbreaking because it makes them question, well, what the hell have I been doing? And whereas I think there might kind of be some superpower in being detached from it. And that's almost, that's what we started discussing. And I sense that's what you keep coming back to, this idea of don't be so wedded to the ideas. Be wedded to the process. Yeah. Perhaps be committed to a process. Be committed to that. And be committed to the process and be committed to the data. Stay true to the data. And so maybe the whole lesson here is about is that commitment to the process as opposed commitment to a particular idea.
Yeah. But the paradox, there's always the paradox. There's always the yin and the yang in everything in life. And so you've still got to love the idea. You've still got to love the principle of it. But remain wedded to the process. I think the reality is most Death Stars, most Silicon Valley, massively over successful people have figured this out. This is the way they work. That's probably true of most entrepreneurs throughout history. So I think what you've got now is a really interesting paradigm within technology where single companies with this thinking at their heart can consume whole sectors and not die. We had a natural progression of business over the decades and over the century. Capitalism is only 250 years old, right? But for the last 250 years, we've had this nice cadence where businesses have come and gone. I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing businesses with this thinking at their heart, and then rightly or wrongly, that ability to constantly course correct and constantly bring to market the right product actually means that that's where we're having this concentration of wealth. So actually we just by this one sort of little idea becomes actually the kind of focus for geopolitics, which is the centralization of wealth and all of the negative as well as the positive things about what we've got from technology, which is if you work in this way, the weird thing is you can't ever be wrong because you kill things before they cost you too much. And that's what most Silicon Valley businesses have figured out.
Yeah. That is really interesting. That is really interesting. Mark, I could talk to you all day. This has been absolutely fascinating. I think so much of what you have shared with us today makes so much sense. I think you are touching on something that is going to resonate for so many people involved in the development of these businesses, particularly within advanced science and engineering. And I thank you for taking the time to share this with us.
Well, no, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Deep Tech Leaders. This podcast has been produced by Bauhaus. You can find out more about us on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.